Hello, everybody. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Hello to our national champions who are competing in this year's IBB World Championship. And hello to our guests joining the live stream. My name is Astrid Eberhard. I'm the Executive Director of the International Brain Bee, and I will be chairing today's session. Unfortunately, Eleanor Thompson, our moderator, is unable to join due to a medical emergency. We're deeply grateful to her for her support. She's supporting this session. She supported last year's session in memory of Dr. Richards. Dr. Drew Richards was very passionate about science and education, and I'm sorry that Eleanor is not here to tell you more about him. So it's my pleasure to introduce our two distinguished panelists, Dr. Andy Scher, Chief Science Officer at Autism Speaks, and Dr. Dave Williams, a physician, a scientist, a CEO, a pilot, and astronaut. I will not go over their background and education. They will introduce themselves and tell you about their extensive experience, their work, and they will share their wisdom with you who are just starting your journey. Dr. Scher will also talk a little bit about Autism Speaks, his work with governments and other organizations around the world, and he's developing large research consortia, so extensive, long-standing experience in the field. And Dr. Williams will talk about his space mission on the Space Shuttle Columbia that was dedicated to neuroscience research, as well as his many other endeavors. You will get insight into into different careers, and that anything is possible. It's supposed to be an informal and highly interactive session, so please don't be afraid to ask questions. You were great yesterday, so again, this is your chance to interact directly with our panelists. And again, congratulations for making it to the World Champion. You're all winners. You're the best in your countries. We look forward to hearing your interactions with today's speakers. So, wow. Andy, are you ready? Over to you.
Thank you, Astrid. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I want to echo Astrid's well-wishing and congratulate all of you. You are indeed all champions. And I know that in particular for some of you, it's pretty late in the day. And I appreciate you staying up, waking up early or staying up and late at night to join us for this conversation. I also want to stress what Astrid said. We like to keep this as conversational as possible. So I'm going to be sharing a little bit about my experience, my path, my career path, if you would, in science. It stretched many years, unfortunately, but it also has many twists and turns. And I'd be happy to answer any question that you may have in terms of some decisions that I made, and also obviously having the benefit of hindsight, how did I feel about how did those decisions play out, right? And over time. So as Astrid said, I'm Chief Science Officer at Autism Speaks. For those who don't know, Autism Speaks, an international research advocacy organization for autistic people and their families. And we're founded originally in the mid 2000s. And so it's been coming up to our 25th year now as an organization, 20 years as an organization. And what we do is that we have three pillars to our mission. One is to raise awareness and increase acceptance and understanding for autistic people and their families around the world. The second is to fund research, everything from basic sciences to public health and policy research, not only in the United States, but also around the world. And the third is to provide our community with information that are actionable and helpful, that direct them to evidence-based services and support that can enhance their well-being and quality of life. And there's a fourth thing that we do as an organization that is it's often very public, but it's not is a little more difficult to package and to define, and that is advocacy. So we advocate at especially at national level, but also globally for our community. and the advocacy really is driven by usually by data, by science. So we call ourselves what we do as evidence-driven data advocacy, and we focus on many things. I think some of the current priorities I could share with you in the United States is that we were able to pass a large piece of legislation in the U.S. At the end of the year in 2024. We're talking about roughly $2 billion that will fund autism research, surveillance, services, and training in this country for years to come. So it's really a collaborative effort that Autism Speak undertook with other stakeholders in our community, self-advocates, other advocacy organizations, families, and so on and so forth. And it's a major accomplishment for the community. Of course, what we're doing now, continue to advocate in this new political environment, is continue to provide policymaker with accurate information about what autism is and what the opportunities are in advancing science, as well as supporting services for our community, as well as continue to support research and access to services in our community, not only in the US, but also around the world. Let me just also say that upfront that before I go into a little more detail about the kind of work that we support, this is my personal perspective, and certainly I think this is how we as an investor in research and science operate, is that oftentimes you hear a differentiation between the research that you invest locally in the US, right, in the United States, versus the research that you invest in internationally. And I think there's always a sense that the kind of research you invest locally might be of higher caliber or shinier, more attractive, sexier. It's a term I hate, but a lot of people uses, right? And that the things that you invest internationally, especially in low resource communities, like low-income countries, are somehow less worthy and less impactful. I just want to make sure that as I talk about the work that we do as an organization, as I did as a program manager, if you will, as a funder throughout my career, I try as best I can not to hold on to those biases, right? Because I think history also has proven itself that not only can you learn from the most challenging of environments, you can actually develop solutions that end up benefiting the world as a whole. So hold on to that thought. So my career path to where I am now is slightly complicated. It's a little slightly different. I was just chatting with Dave and Astrid and Matthias before you guys got on. That I'm an immigrant to the U.S. My family came to the States when I was a teenager. And the reason is that I needed an open heart surgery that was not accessible in the U.S., in Taiwan. I grew up in Taiwan. So I think that foreshadows some of the things that became important to me in my career. So my family, my parents gave up, their professional career and basically took on a different life in the U.S. And like thousands of other immigrants, right? The story was, how do you get ahead through education and self-betterment? And oh my God, you got to focus on science or law and a profession that are, of course, self-sustaining and so on and so forth. So all your typical immigrant pressures that went with that. And I was a good son, so I follow those guidance. And so I majored in biochemistry in college, and then it took a couple years off, and then I then enrolled in graduate school, right? And I wasn't a very convincing graduate student at the time, meaning that even to myself, I was not entirely convinced I should be in the lab, even though I work extensively in the lab, right? So I should say that since high school, I've always volunteered in the laboratory because I always been intrigued by that, and also having benefited from medicine, advances in medicine, there's always a sense I want to give back a little bit. So starting in high school, I started working in a cardiovascular laboratory and doing prostaglandin research, right? These are, tissue bath, muscle strips and so on. So very basic tissue culture, cell biology work. And then I continued to support myself in college by working in laboratories, getting lab tech jobs. I jumped around quite a bit. Went from, for example, drawing blood for tissue culture work in a clinical laboratory to working at a national laboratory that are examining the consequences of low-level radiation exposure. It's a NASA contract, actually. So it was a government laboratory where I did some work on, and I learned a lot about different types of research. And I think more importantly, I think it really instilled in me an approach to science, right? That is transferable regardless of the subject that you're interested in or you're studying. The way you think about a problem and the way you try to design a process or a way to find the solutions to the problem that's being posed. And so when I went to graduate school, I focused on molecular cell biology initially because, that was kind of what I was interested in. I was interested in molecular biology primarily because of biotechnology at the time. That was not the beginning, but in the mid of the first biotechnology boom in the world. So at that time, there were a lot of, so for example, cloning and mass producing proteins from clipping genes from humans and implant and transferring them to bacteria and so on. So like producing max amount of human insulin, for example, was very novel, and it was held the promise of industries, right, and pharma and so on and so forth. So there was a lot of interest in that kind of work, and it really did feel like you are helping to invent the future, right? So people were like Nobel Prize winner like Paul Berg at the time was working at Stanford and really pioneer with people like Loria and so on and so forth, whole field of molecular biology, the guys were on the East Coast and Cold Spring Harbor. And so there was a palpable sense of excitement at the time and to get into this particular area. And I eventually got into NYU Medical Center. It was a fairly unique environment. Well, maybe not that unique anymore, but it was unique in the back then in the sense that graduate student, which I was a graduate student, took classes with the medical students, right? So the medical and graduate students are in classes together for the first 3 years or so. We took the same basic science courses. We didn't take anatomy as graduate student, but we took cell bio, all the basic stuff. And so it was very much as we learned these basic information, some of which I learned already in college, but you're taking it from a more clinical perspective, right? Which I think was important for me in terms of helping me to think about or approach these issues, going forward, always from a clinical perspective. I think at graduate school, my colleagues, some of them already know that they were going to go into biotechnology, while others were sure they're going to pursue a career in academia. And there's still others who are not really sure. And I belong that camp, right? I jumped around a little bit when I was in graduate school, did various rotations. And in the end, I ended up in the lab not because the topic was hot or because it was even necessarily exciting. It was a little weird, the topic, right? But I liked the mentor. And I think this is one of my important advice, career advice, for younger scientists, is that you need to work with people that you can get along with, right? You need to work with people that you like and who likes you. Because at the end of the day, that level of support is much more important for your career development than anything else. There's brilliant scientists are a dime a dozen. I know it's funny to say that, but they really are. But nice, caring, brilliant scientists are few and far between. Seek those people out. It's the best thing you can do for yourself, really. So in graduate school, yeah. So anyway, so I went into this lab, and this lab uh, had only one NSF grant, right? The National Science Foundation grant. For those who know, NSF grant are more basic science geared. It's really science for knowledge's sake. My mentor at that time was interested in circular DNA, extracellular circular DNA. People call them junk DNA. That gives you some sense in terms of how esoteric the topic was, right? But he was interested in why and how did these junk DNA form. Of course, now, decades later, we know that this actually, they're byproducts of, cellular processes and cancer and immunological processes and so on and so forth. But back then it was a curiosity, but he was a really nice guy. And I remember after the first 6 months, he ran out of money, right? So I had a decision to make. I can either jump to a different lab at that time, the 6 months in my graduate school career, or I stick it out. The department will fund me for another 6 months, and I try to see if I can make something happen in that 6 months. So I don't remember how I made that decision, but I made a decision to give it a shot. I'm not always the most risk-averse person. And so what we decided to do was, at the time, I was interested in this paper that came out in Science magazine then. We were talking about a way to replicate short fragments of DNA, right, quickly, from trace amount into something you can see on a gel. And that was the first PCR paper. I don't know if you guys know about the history of PCR. I'm seriously dating myself at this point. But the first PCR polymerase chain reaction paper by Randall Saeki and friends came out of a company called Cetus. It's a small biotech company in California at that time, from my hometown, actually, Berkeley. Uh, and it was exciting because what they showed was that you can actually detect trace amount of DNA in a mixture of biomaterials, right? And by repeated cycles of heating and cooling amplification of that piece of DNA with the polymerase. It was revolutionary in concept, and it led to a revolutionary product. And of course, everything we do now in science and medicine has a little bit of PCR. The COVID test, perfect example of a very practical outcome of the PCR technology. So what I was interested in that time as a researcher was endogenous retroviruses or molecular evidence of previous pandemics in human, right? So that somehow got into all of our germline. So if you look at all our germline, your DNA, you see hundreds and thousands of the copies of these virus-like elements, right? That are previously transposable, that jump into our genome somewhere during evolution, but now reside in all of our genome. Some of them are still active. So for example, there's a family of endogenous retrovirus called ERV3, that produce a protein that is actually essential for placenta to function properly, right? So it's an interesting, family of things, but it was not very well known. What I did to just shorten the narrative here, I learned how to use PCR to adapt the process actually to clone a family of genes by using conserved sequences, right? So that's the first demonstration using PCR. And that got me a job as a postdoc at Cetus, right? Industry postdoc after graduation. So that's when I first deviated from academia, went to industry. I spent 3 years in Cetus, and it transformed to Chiron, and then was sold to Roche, this large pharmaceutical company. I'm sharing all this because it's informative in terms of the decision I made. I like working in small biotech because there's the flexibility, there's a sense of excitement that you're breaking some rules here, right? And trying to create something new. I didn't like working about large pharma, right? So when CETAS was sold to pharma, that culture was suffocating for me. So I left. I joined another biotech company, but this time back in New York, formed by two Nobel laureates. This was 1989. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the technology called ribozymes or catalytic RNA. In 1989, two researchers, Tom Cech and Sid Altman at Yale, Tom Cech at University of Colorado, won the Nobel Prize in medicine for discovering that RNA has catalytic activity. So you actually take some RNA, transfer RNA is a good example of this, right? They actually, without any protein, can self-cleave and form the final product. That was a transformational discovery. And of course, the two gentlemen who won the Nobel Prize promptly set up two competing biotech companies right after the Nobel Prize. I joined the one in New York. I was employee number 4. Heady days because, again, a young guy um, in a rapidly evolving, rapidly moving biotech business, getting talked to investors, thinking about the work that you're doing, trying to patent. So I have a couple of patents in nucleic acid therapeutic and diagnostic came out at that time period. But also in that time period, you see when you learn what not to do in biotech business. The company I was with failed ultimately, and painful lessons to learn. I was lucky to then landed on my feet back into academia, went back to NYU for a couple of years. That's when I heard about from a relative about an opportunity with a foundation that is looking into autism research, National Alliance for Autism Research. The budget was modest. They had maybe $6 million a year in research funding they want to invest. But I remember when the opening came up, my cousin has a child with autism. I've known this for a long time, but embarrassed to say, didn't really pay much attention to it. But when she told me about this opportunity, my first thought was, cool, now I can learn some interesting science, right? It's kind of crass. Um, but the first year I spent at NAR, and that's where I met Astrid as well. Um, I spent a lot of time with families, right? And they're amazing people. If you ever spend time with a family of affected by autism, you'll understand what I'm saying. Amazing people. And that's when it made me realize that maybe I can stick around. I can make a little bit of difference here with what I do, what I learn. Uh, so I had the good fortune and the privilege to really then serve that community, helping to think about where to invest the research money that's really raised by parents and the community. Is obviously I don't take that charge lightly. But I think what's been exciting for me is that, and this is the part I really want to underscore, is that um, it's been an ongoing education process for me, right? Because my background is molecular biology, molecular cell biology, but I was able to learn environmental health sciences through, there's some very smart, very kind people who helped me along the way. These are eminent scientists and so on and so forth. I learned more about clinical sciences and so on. So I was able to, with my couple of decades in science funding, working with people like Astrid and others to learn various areas of science and understand what are the core scientific question that need to be answered in order to move the field forward. What are the opportunities? How do you design and create opportunity for researcher to be able to tackle these problems? Um, and then how do you then try to amplify the outcome of your research funding so that it not only can power the subsequent work, but also inspire other researchers, right? And then finally, I think this is the hardest part. And for those of you who have aspirations, right, to make sure that your work is relevant to the broader society, this is always relevant, but it's a matter of timeline. As I gotten older, I get a little more impatient. I want things I do to have meaning and impact in a shorter time span. I've gone from, oh, I can wait decades for something to happen to now I want to see something in the next 5 years. And so that thing that changed the way I look at and think about how I invest in science as well. And I'll just end by saying that the past 10 years or so has been probably the most gratifying time for me. Um, Interestingly, because I feel like I have more or less moved away from everything I was trained to do in the basic and translational research space. I'm firmly in the public health space now. Um, I spent the past decade plus working global public health. So I've been to many of the countries that are on the screen here: Albania, Ukraine, Israel, Croatia, Poland, Thailand, Kazakhstan. I've been to all these places, and I've seen communities in these countries. Um, and the consequences of policy and access to the innovation that researchers like yourself are able to generate, right? To me, that is it's a different set of challenge, but it's just as meaningful because look, you guys can maybe 10 years, 20 years from now will create answers that will solve problems for our community, right? Or some other community or mankind in general, right? Why not? Uh, but just because you create a solution doesn't mean that people can benefit from it, right? That's why I think about a lot these days. How do you make sure that what you create as researchers, as scientists, can actually change lives? Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Andy. I was unable to turn my audio on there for a while. That was very interesting. I knew some of it, but of course, it's always good to get a refresher. Um, and it's clear that you've been really in the autism space for a long, long time, and that the work is really, really relevant to society and meaningful to you. So it was really good for our students, I think, to hear about that. Does anybody have any questions of Andy about his presentation? We'll have another chance later when after Dave has spoken, we can have a conversation, all of us, and you can also talk a little bit about your interests maybe. But any questions right now?
Randy?
Oh, Randy, go ahead.
Yeah, I yeah. First of all, thank you for your monologue. It's very interesting to hear kind of how your career evolved. Um, I just I'm now a biomedical science student and kind of research is what I want to do in the future. And these past months, I've been having kind of like the same realization of, do I want to go into research? Do I want to go into public policy, like public health, or um, or if I go into research, what field I will go into, etc. And what you basically said is that that kind of evolved and branched off. But do you think that like today it's kind of more of a different age where you have to be a bit more specialized to kind of be more competitive in the job market? I feel like because um, maybe um, before 40 years, it was maybe a bit easier to have a biochemistry degree and then move on to a genetics lab, and then after some years, move on to something more neuroscience like autism. But I feel like today it's a bit more difficult to kind of come out from a biochemistry degree and then go to like work on an autism research lab because there are already hundreds of graduates who have studied neuroscience and not biochemistry. They're much more predisposed. So do you think it's a good idea to specialize more early on as to be more competitive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. First of all, thank you, Brandy, for that great question. I think it's a complicated question. Um, I would say that, because of the changes in technology, I think what I often talk to, younger scientists or early career scientists is that they probably need to even think about what does it mean to be a scientist in the coming years, right? If the things that we traditionally relegate to researchers, like a mentor, right? Let's say if I have a student, I advise them on study design, research opportunities, maybe a nudge to a certain one area and another, and so on and so forth. All these things I described just now, right, can be provided by AI agent. I mean, maybe not great, but in a reasonable proximity. So what does that mean to be a researcher going forward? Um, and I think that's something probably I would recommend you think about before even thinking about whether you should be more practical oriented or basic oriented. So that's one thing. And then I think the second thing is that what we're also seeing, even though we're seeing these emergence of technology that are fundamentally reshaping the whole research enterprise, what does it mean to be a scientist, and so on and so forth, uh, that the inequity, right, the inequality is still remain pronounced. And that's not being solved, right, by anyone at this point. If anything, what we're seeing is a uh, regression to things that are more basic, things that are more translational, things that are more fundamental, rather than things that have more impact at a social level. Um, I'll use your own country as an example, Albania, right? So we did a lot of work in Albania with the Albanian Children's Foundation. We provided training for therapists there. So the fact that we have behavioral program for children and family in Albania affected by autism is because some of the work that we did with the former First Lady, Mrs. Barisha. Uh, but it hasn't gone anywhere since, you know? And so the problem that I try to solve from getting started in Albania has remained stubbornly intractable. Not because that's what I was saying, right? It's almost as if it feels like what you study, what you focus on early or late is less important than whether or not you have the ability to deliver something actually to the intended audience or the community. Does that make any sense at all? I mean, to
Yeah,
me,
I mean,
it's very practically based, right? I mean, if I can't deliver something to the community, I'm
yeah.
not sure how to frame my work.
Mhm. So it's more science to be applied and to actually be useful somewhere, rather than science which will be just published in a paper just for people to brag about or to have their name on it.
Very,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, exactly. But
Mhm.
it's very crude, but yes, that's basically it.
Yeah.
It's not entirely fair either, but yes, but that's
Yeah.
basically it.
Okay, well,
Lena?
thank you.
Sure.
Lena?
Lena?
Yes, first of all, thank you for your talk. It was very, very interesting. And you talked about research, and I'm wondering how to stay motivated, because I imagine it to be very intriguing and fascinating if you do research on a topic, but then there must be times where you just don't have any progress and you become frustrated. So how do you stay motivated during this time?
Yeah, well, great question, right? So this is a long time ago when I was a graduate student, when I was working in the lab, we used to call, the golden hours, right? Yes, when you're a bench scientist, there are these golden hours. So literally, we mean hours because you can spend 5 years, 6 years as a postdoc or grad student, and you may be able have all your experiments work within 1 week, and you write your dissertation, what have you. based on a 1 week's result, right? They're going, and then you can try it again other time and it doesn't work. But I think this is how, the evolution in terms of the way I think about science and how I prioritize work I do evolved, right? Is really thinking about, the downtimes when I'm not generating result, right? What I'm doing, is it really meaningful? I think initially the answer was, okay, so identify another member of gene family, who cares? Especially if it's already inactive, it's a pseudogene or something, who cares? But then, you start doing more things that are clinically relevant, then you go, okay, well, maybe, some family will care about what you're doing. So for me, it was a process that slowly changed, right? And over time to become something that continues to motivate me, even when I'm not delivering things on a daily basis, because then ultimately, what I'm doing is meaningful to some family and it's going to change. I mean, even things like I want to make sure that we understand research not in a narrow sense, but in a broad sense, right? So for example, one of the things that we're trying to do right now is trying to increase clinical awareness about autistic people and the risk they have for cardiovascular disease. Okay, because if you go to most cardiologists these days, you ask them, how many autistic adults do you serve? They will have no idea, right? And the reason for that is because most autistic adults do not disclose their status. And because when they disclose their status, typically what happens is that they refuse services. The doctor will say, oh, I don't know how to treat autistic adults. You have to go to a specialist. I can't treat you, right? So by increasing clinical awareness, right, how do you increase that clinical awareness as a professional that are practicing? That's research. And that impact is almost immediate and it's transformational, right? It could result in better care. It could result in better outcome, even a more pleasant experience for autistic adult in a clinic can directly come out as a result of your research. Anyway, so again, I'm rambling, but that's kind of where I'm coming from.
We'll take one more question right now from Katya, and then we'll move on to Dave Williams. That's
Hi.
okay with you, Andy?
Hi, Andy.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much for all of it. It was insanely insightful. And I was wondering, now as an experienced researcher and with everything that you already know, is there anything you would do differently in your career path? Like anything you would have changed, done differently?
Yeah, I probably would have spent less time in the lab. Probably gotten out of the lab a little earlier than I did. I think I spent, even including volunteer, 2 decades in the lab. I think half of that would have been good.
Great. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, everybody, for your questions. Can we turn over to you, Dave? Are you ready?
Yes, yeah, thanks very much, Astrid. And I'm really thrilled to be joining all of you today. And Andy, really enjoyed hearing your story as well. To me, what's really exciting about this morning is to see all of you from different parts of the world joining us today. The greatest lesson of the International Space Station is countries from all over the world working together collaboratively in space to perform fundamental and applied research to help us extend our knowledge and capability. It's unbelievable. And I'll share with you, when you're in space, I mean, just look at the picture behind me. When you're in space and you orbit the Earth every 90 minutes, you see a sunrise and a sunset every 45 minutes, you realize that the Earth is actually a really small place, and that we're all here together in this global village. And the solution for us as researchers to be able to go forward is to work together collaboratively with individuals throughout the whole world. And I think the connections that you're making through International Brain Bee, if you're lucky, keep these connections alive for the rest of your careers, and you'll find that they'll be tremendously beneficial. I'm a little bit older. So my dream started in 1961. I was 7 years old at the time, and Alan Shepard lifted off to go into space. I think it was May 11th or something, 1961. But I watched him fly in space, the first U.S. astronaut to fly in space. Yuri Gagarin, of course, from Russia, had flown about a month earlier than Alan Shepard. But it was an amazing time of exploration. For me, the definition of exploration is being relentlessly curious, always asking why. So as a kid, I had decided I wanted to become an astronaut, and I had this incredible dream that I wanted to be able to go and explore outer space. And I was told that that would be impossible. And my first message to you is, do not, under any circumstances, let other people define your dreams. Define your dreams for yourself, and recognize that over the course of your career, your dreams may change, they may morph, they may take you in different directions. But self-direction, I think, is a really important element of this. The second thing that I'm going to share with you is, do not use the word impossible. Get rid of the letters IM out of the word impossible and figure out how to make the impossible possible. So I was told I could never be an astronaut. And I asked why, and it was because Canada in those days did not have an astronaut program. The only countries sending humans into the space in the 1960s were Russia and the United States. So it appeared impossible that I would ever get a chance to fly in space. So I thought that if I couldn't go to outer space, I wanted to explore inner space, the undersea world. I started to learn how to scuba dive when I was 12 years old, and had to learn about Dalton's law of partial pressure, respiratory and cardiovascular physiology when I was a little kid just starting high school. And I think that challenged me to get excited about science and what science can do and what science can enable us to do. So I have a presentation that I wanted to share with you a little bit, but I was lucky to go from, dreaming of becoming an astronaut to becoming a neuroscientist, an emergency trauma physician, an astronaut pilot, a hospital CEO, and now I'm a CEO of a biomedical tech startup company. And, I'm more than happy to answer any questions you guys have about the journey that I took place on. But let me show my screen to you. And I'm just going to optimize for video sharing. So now you should be looking at my screen, and we're going to go to play from start. So here we go. I titled the talk Neuroscience and the Mystery of the Mind because fundamentally I'm still passionate about the mystery of the mind and how actually the brain functions and what we're able to do. Let me just hit share again. Is this showing? There we go. All right. Let me know if you guys can't see what you're supposed to be seeing, because from my end, it looks like it should be working. So anyway, I started out as an undergraduate at McGill University in Montreal, Quebec in Canada in 1971, and I did an undergraduate degree in neurobiology and comparative physiology. And in those days, I started in neurobiology because I thought it was interesting. I had no idea how the brain worked. I had no idea how one even did research in neuroscience, but I thought it was an interesting area to be able to pursue. And I'm just having problems advancing to the next slide. So there we go. The person on the left-hand side, his name was Ron Chase, Professor Ron Chase. He was a neurobiologist at McGill, and I was one of his undergraduate students. But more importantly, this is a neurotree connection chart. So you can pick this for any investigator in the world in any scientific discipline, and it shows the individuals that have been graduate students in the organizations that you've been working with. And it really illustrates for all of us that we as scientists influence the future of research by influencing individuals that we work with collaboratively in labs. So in the right-hand corner, Dr. Dennis Willows, I worked with him at the University of Washington.
Dave, to interrupt you, we still only see the first slide.
You're still only seeing the first slide?
Yeah.
Okay, let me see. It says it is paused. Okay, what about now?
No. You want to maybe reshare your...
Yeah, let me just try and reshare and see
what's going on. Matthias may have an idea here.
Yeah, it worked before, but of course, just because things worked before doesn't mean that it's going to work now. Okay, now I'm sharing my desktop. Is that working?
Well, we see your desktop with a gray square in the middle.
Okay. All right. So now let's try launching PowerPoint. So you got to love it. You can fly in space, but get technology to work properly.
There we go. There we go.
All right. So there we are. So yeah, that's Ron Chase on the left-hand side and Dennis Willows. But more importantly, as researchers and as students, we have a chance to work and influence others. And that's an important journey for all of us to be on. So I started out as an undergraduate. And by the way, speak up if the slides aren't advancing or whatever. But anyway, as an undergraduate, I did work on a marine gastropod mollusk. That's a snail. It's a big snail that lives in the ocean. And snails, the nervous system is a little bit different than humans. Instead of having a central brain, they have what are called ganglia, which are collections of nerves. And we used to study these by putting an electrode inside one of these nerve cells to see how the nerves communicated with one another. And the original researcher that really focused on this was Eric Kandel, who some of you may or may not have read Eric Kandel's work. But it led to a whole set of research looking at trying to understand the relationship between different nerve cells and how they spoke to each other. I went on from that project working at McGill University's Center for Parasitology. Again, as an undergraduate, we were looking at synaptic transmission. And when nerves connect with each other, they do so through a connection called the synapse, and neurotransmitters, little chemicals, go from the presynaptic area to the postsynaptic area, causing signals in the nervous system. And we were interested to understand how parasitic nematodes could actually influence their behavior by developing blocking agents for specific points in their nervous system and potentially develop new drugs to treat parasitic infections by specifically blocking neurotransmission in parasitic nematodes. So this is a picture of the nematodes that I was working with, and on the right-hand side is a fluorescent stain of the different neurotransmitters in the circumesophageal nerve ring of the parasite. And the reason why I'm telling you all this is because I ended up doing a lot of different things. I started off as an invertebrate neurobiologist doing intracellular recording in snails, went from there to nematodes, and then went on into graduate school and switched over to vertebrates and was doing research on steroids. And I think we're all familiar with the concept of corticosteroids. They come from the adrenal gland in our body, generally associated with stress, but they're associated with metabolism and a whole lot of other things. And people who have overactive adrenal glands, it's a disease called Cushing's disease, and we have to be able to intervene and lower the level of those corticosteroids in their body. And then there's individuals where the adrenal gland's not working well, and that's called Addison's disease, and we have to give them steroids to be able to treat them effectively. But more importantly, the research I did as a graduate student was understanding that steroids can actually be neuroactive. And that was a totally unique concept back in the 1970s when people were focused on neurotransmitters that were stored presynaptically and acted postsynaptically. The concept of a chemical compound called a neuromodulator that could be neuroactive and exert broad effects on the nervous system was something that was a little unusual. And the chemical structure of a steroid is there. There's 4 rings. Doesn't really matter what it actually looks like. But over on the right-hand side of the slide, there's an anesthetic called thiopental, which we as doctors use to put people to sleep to do general anesthesia. And it turns out that the anesthetic dose of thiopental is around 18 milligrams per kilogram, which is the exact same as a 5-alpha reduced derivative of a corticosteroid. So let me get this straight. Corticosteroids in our own body can have anesthetic-like properties, and that is true. And we saw that behaviorally in patients who had both Addison's and Cushing's disease. So I did some research in rats. This is a 3-dimensional image of the reticular formation in the brainstem of a rat. And the reticular formation is that part of our brain. We as humans have it too. That's the part that keeps us awake and helps us fall asleep and does all the basic basic functions of our body in a 24-hour rhythm. And this plot basically shows you a series of dots going from A through to F, and you'll notice they go down to 0. And that's following the administration of one of these steroids, and the dots reflect electrical activity in the part of the brain that keeps us awake. And you can see that after we administered this steroid, that neuronal activity basically diminished, suggesting that yes, steroids can play a role in sleep-wake cycles. So I went from all of that, being a neuroscientist, to being an emergency trauma physician. You would think when I became a physician and went to medical school, I'd end up in neurology or neurosurgery because of my passion for neuroscience, but I actually ended up in emergency trauma. And I answered an ad in 1992, want to be an astronaut? Sure. So I applied to be an astronaut in Canada. At that point, I was the director of a major trauma center in Toronto, Ontario, not really focused very much on scientific research anymore, but focused more on clinical activities. And my first space flight was in 1998, a mission called NeuroLab, dedicated to celebrating the decade of the brain and doing neuroscience research in space. So on the right-hand side of the slide is the crew. On the left-hand side of the slide is a poster celebrating the work of Santiago Ramón y Cajal, a Spanish neurohistologist who won the Nobel Prize in 1906 for understanding that the brain is made up of billions of different nerve cells, and that histological image are from cortical neurons in different layers in the cortex. I think it's probably either a cat or a rat, but to me this is a very artistic looking drawing as well. So we flew the histological slides from Cajal's collection in space with us, celebrating neuroscience. So what did we do? Well, one of the first things we did was study orientation. And there was a neurovestibular physiologist in Toronto who worked at York University who was very interested in the role of visual stimuli in helping us orient ourselves to the environment. And he created a rotating room. This is just a big plywood box, and you would climb inside it, and it was decorated to look like somebody's kitchen. And once you were in there, you had to strap yourself in with a seatbelt, and they rotated the box around you. So you weren't actually moving at all. You were stationary, but your visual stimuli showed that your surrounding environment was now going upside down. And despite the very strong gravitational cue, the haptic cue that you felt in your legs and lower torso, you instantly felt like you're upside down. It was a totally bizarre sensation. So it led us to conclude that where your head is where we perceive up and where we perceive down. So this is a picture of the my first space flight, the 7 of us in space, and we're all oriented in a manner that we can understand on Earth. The floor of the space lab is towards the bottom of the image, and the ceiling is the top, and the walls are on the side. So this is pretty traditional. We're floating around in space, so it's very cool. But what happens if we orient ourselves a little bit differently? And I'm over on the upper right-hand corner. That's me back in the mustache days. But if I was in space looking at you from this orientation, I would say you're upside down and I'm right side up. So our perception of orientation is really quite important. And the question scientifically is, what are the different cues that you use to determine your orientation to your environment? So let's study this a little bit. So I can't really see you guys anymore, and I'm hoping that you're all still there. But anyway, I'll ask you guys, what is this a picture of? Just anybody, just unmute your mic and answer the question. What does this look like a picture of?
A snowy top of a mountain, maybe?
A snowy top of a mountain, sure. I mean, to me, it looks like a snowy top of a mountain. You see trees, you see snow, you see a group of what looks like people in the center in this. And what would you say if I told you that's totally incorrect? In fact, this is the correct orientation of the slide. This slide shows a snowy valley, and the people who are down there in the center of the slide are glacier skiing down the slope. So for a minute there, we thought we were oriented and perceiving this image correctly, but in fact, we were incorrectly oriented and misperceiving this image. So simply changing our perception of an image based on body position is something really important. We study this in space using what we call the virtual environment generator. And for those of you who have a Meta Quest 3 at home, you're probably chuckling, oh, look at that. That was the early days of virtual reality. And of course, with the Apple Vision Pro and Meta Quest 3 and other immersive devices these days, virtual reality is a lot better. But we were able to study something called looming linear vection. And you're probably wondering, well, what the heck is looming linear vection? If you're sitting in a car, stationary, or you're sitting in a train or a bus or whatever, and the car beside you moves, you're not moving, but you're by this car, the typical scenario is if the car beside you moves forward, you feel like you're going backwards. And that's a sense of vection. It's a sense of self-motion based on our perception of the environment around us. So we were in space and we put on this virtual environment generator and we're looking down this virtual corridor that seems to disappear into infinity. And you hit a little button and all of a sudden things started to move and the walls around you were moving, but very quickly in space, you felt the walls were stationary and you were like the ghost in the movie Ghostbusters flying down this virtual corridor as fast as you could. It was an unbelievable sensation to be able to feel. We also did sleep studies in space. So one of the ways that we can understand how the nervous system works is record electrical activity from electrodes placed on the scalp. So this is me doing a sleep study in space. And of course, we had to do the control research on the ground. So I would wear this at home and drive into work wearing a sleep net on my head. It was kind of bizarre to be able to do. We also flew neonatal rats in space, and you can see in the upper right-hand corner, this is a neonatal rat. And before I show you the video, the reason why we did this is because there's critical windows of development of the nervous system, and we wanted to understand whether a rat who learned how to walk in space would actually be able to readapt to being on Earth and learn to walk on Earth. And let's just play the video and you can see the rat floating around there. This little neonatal rat grabs onto this bar and goes, oh, thank goodness, I'm on a bar now, and walks along there. So he's obviously learned to walk. In the absence of gravity, learns how to grab onto something and be able to mobilize. And then we take him, bring him off there. Look, he's floating around. This rat's wondering like, hey, what the heck is going on here? And just like the astronauts in space, very quickly learned to be able to get around using forepaws and hindpaws. We tried to assess the righting reflex in space. And when we brought the animals back to Earth, they relearned to walk on Earth. The only difference between the control animals and the space animals was very subtle differences in the righting reflex a year after coming back to Earth, which suggests that the brain is not necessarily hardwired, that we can understand different phenomena and they can change over time. This is a picture of the Escher staircase where we were doing research with Bruce McNaughton at the University of Arizona. And I can tell you, this was the first time in history this research has been done. And it's one of the most amazing things in my life, being able to be a researcher and do research like this as part of a collaborative research team. But if you look in the blue container on the right-hand side, there's a series of striped lines. This is similar to an Escher staircase in the sense that if you put a rat on this maze, it walks along horizontally, would then walk up the wall, walk sideways on the wall, walk sideways on the next wall, walk down and continue around. And the question is, the nerve cells in the hippocampus, which is the part of the brain that helps us navigate, do they respond in a three-dimensional manner? And the only way to study this would be in space, because otherwise you'd be impacted by gravity. So in fact, we did study this in space, and you notice on the red, on the right-hand side, there's this red area. That's where the firing pattern of this place cell took place in a three-dimensional manner, specifically during the mission. So yes, we also discovered that humans, although we live in a three-dimensional world, we walk around in 2 dimensions of the three-dimensional world, but our brain is actually coded to be able to navigate in a three-dimensional environment. We flew an oyster toadfish in space. You're probably wondering, like, why is he showing us this? Because the oyster toadfish, we were able to implant an electrode in the vestibular nerve to record how the organ of balance in its inner ear responded to being in space. And this is a picture of the wafer electrode. And the important aspect of this is not just the research and how the vestibular apparatus changed in space. It's the fact that now you could technically have a window into the nervous system. And many people thought that was impossible in the 1970s when I was doing neuroscience. And yet we were able to do this in the 1990s, have a window into the nervous nervous system of an animal. So the mission was very successful. We came back after the mission. We were asked to go to Madrid, and the King of Spain requested that we return Cajal's slides to him personally. But NASA won the gold medal from the Superior Council for Scientific Investigation in Spain, and each crew member won a bronze medal. It was pretty amazing. And there's a picture of me returning one of Cajal's drawings to the King of Spain. It was just a remarkable mission. After that, a few years later, I had met a researcher at the University of Guelph, also a neuroscientist, who was studying cutaneous hyperesthesia, which basically is increased sensation on the soles of your feet. And as you get older, many people have decreased sensation. Many diabetics have decreased sensation in their lower extremities, which leads them to fall. But in space, interestingly, in the absence of walking, you get increased sensation in the sole of your feet. So why is it that your sensory system changes? So Leah did a study on astronauts flying short and long duration missions, talked about cutaneous hypersensitivity and the role that plays in balance disorders. Rick Hansen, very good friend of mine, and Rick talks about individuals as difference makers, but Rick tragically ended up becoming paraplegic in a car accident when he was younger, wheelchaired around the world to raise money to do spinal cord injury research to help us find a cure for spinal cord injury. And I've titled this slide From Science Fiction to Science Fact because what we thought in the 1970s was science fiction has now become science fact, and we're able to develop windows into the nervous system to help us come up with smart prosthetic devices. Prosthetic devices in the past used to be simply a mechanical device, but now with smart prosthetics, we can actually have individuals activate the prosthetic device by thought and basically connecting through sensory systems the prosthetic device to their nervous system. So these smart prosthetics are incredible in the range and capability that we've been able to do. And when you think about the fact that, as undergraduates or high school students, we may not be able to influence things, I challenge that a little bit. This is a group of students at McGill University. They're undergraduate students. In 2019, they developed a thought project to control wheelchair movement by thought. They used EEGs, surface electrodes, to record electrical activity on the subject's brain, and then the subject was able to drive the wheelchair by thought. And think about the incredible capability that gives people who are quadriplegic. It was a group of students that came up with this solution, and needless to say, they won an award as a result. So I went from being a neuroscientist on my first space flight to being a construction worker on my second space flight, helping build the International Space Station. But again, we use virtual reality, augmented reality as tools to train, understanding the critical role that they can play in influencing our nervous system. And as a spacewalker, I did have a chance to do 3 spacewalks. And I'll tell you, when you go out the airlock, you realize that if you're going out head first, you see the Earth as above you. If you go out feet first, you feel like the Earth is below you, and it's pretty scary because you think you might actually fall. But there's no question that when I was outside working on right by the solar array, if I tilted my head back, I would think I was looking up at the Earth, and I was go, wow, that's a pretty spectacular image. I had no illusion of falling. And yet if I simply rotated 180 degrees so my feet are pointed towards the Earth, I had a very compelling sense that I might fall if I let go of the handrail. And I'll just finish by sharing with you this quote from Steve Jobs. Your work is going to fill a large part of your life, and the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do. And earlier we were talking about the importance of specialization. I think, one of the messages I'd like to share with you guys is I've been a neuroscientist, I've been an astronaut. I've been an emergency trauma physician. I've run a hospital. Now I'm a CEO of a biomedical tech startup company. So again, don't let other people defy your dreams. Go forward and pursue the dreams that you have to the best of your ability. So I'm going to stop sharing at this point. I apologize for the technical issues there, but I just wanted to be able to share some of the images and some of the magic about what it's like being in space. But more importantly, share with you the fact that life is a journey that's associated with twists and turns and ups and downs. One of the things that I think helped me in my career was very similar to Andy. It's a willingness to take risks. But I found that if you truly believe in yourself and you're passionate about what you do, follow your passion and you'll be able to succeed in achieving your dreams. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dave.
No, my pleasure.
We have lots of questions here. Where do we start?
Yeah.
Luca?
I was just applauding.
Oh, no, sorry. I thought you were asking a question. No, we have one from Katja. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, I wanted to say thank you for this incredible story. It was incredibly inspiring. I can say for myself that I'm really passionate for it regarding neuroscience, and I'm also really passionate in diplomacy. And I was always wondering how will I ever be able to combine these two things, two kind of different passions. And so to think that you were able to combine neuroscience and being an astronaut, it really, really inspired me to believe that I can do it somehow. And so my question was primarily, it's kind of a personal question, but do you have children, like kids? So
Yeah, oh yeah.
how do you combine that? Because that's been one of my most primary worries when picking out what I want to focus on as a job. And I think being just a neuroscientist and having a family, that's already difficult. And I also want to do diplomacy with that, so that's even more difficult. And so you, as somebody who did that and being an astronaut, I would love to hear from you how it is combining family and those two things.
Yeah, so it's a great question. So let me tell you my definition for success as an astronaut. My definition for success was to stay off the front page of all newspapers for making a mistake. Like you really don't want to mess up and say, oh, Canadian astronaut destroys space station because he let go of a piece of hardware or something. You don't want that to happen. So also, I wanted to be able to stay married and have kids that recognized me. And, I'm being a little bit facetious in saying all that, but it illustrates the fact that my commitment was not just to my career. My commitment is to my marriage and also to being there for our kids. And, today we have three children. My son is 31 now. He has Down syndrome. Amazing kid. He's actually won 2 gold medals in the track and field competition for Special Olympics in the province of Ontario, and he's going to nationals now to compete at the Olympic level in the nationals. It's incredible. Our daughter is just finishing a PhD in neuroscience. I did not influence her. It was her choice, but she's finishing a PhD in neuroscience, specializing in autism spectrum disorders. And our nephew came to live with us many years ago, very sadly after his parents passed away, and he's doing a master's in public policy at McGill University. It's not always easy. It's a juggling act. And there's many days where you're going to think, how am I going to pull this off? But I think it's important to prioritize thinking about marriage, thinking about kids, and being able to build that into a career. And yes, you can do it. My wife was a senior captain for Air Canada and flew 787s all over the world. So when we were living in Houston, she would actually fly from Houston to Toronto and then pick up her airplane, fly that to London, Paris, Zurich, wherever, and then come back to Toronto and then fly back home. Is that hard? Of course it's hard, but she did that because I had a very unique opportunity to be an astronaut and fly in space. So you can always figure out a way, but I think it's important to define success as not just career success, but making sure that you're investing time and effort in relationships, not just with your spouse, but relationships with your friends and all the collaborative research networks that you have, and then also certainly in your children. And there's nothing more incredible than watching kids grow up and be able to achieve their dreams.
Thank you so much. That's like one of the most inspiring things I've heard. If you can juggle being a parent, a neuroscientist, and an astronaut, I believe that I can juggle diplomacy and neuroscience somehow.
Oh, you can. Yeah. Any other questions?
And Andy, of course, is also a father and is traveling all over the world, so he can do it as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, totally agree with everything Dave said, but I also want to say that, I'm sure your future partner will be very helpful in making sure that everything works out for you as well. So,
Thank you so much, Andy.
Do we have any other questions? Do I remember one of you wanting to being an emergency physician, being interested in emergency medicine? Was that you, Lena?
Yes, it actually was. Yes, so Dave, can you maybe say how your work as a trauma surgeon was in a hospital?
Yeah, so emergency medicine, if you want to make a difference in people's lives and you want immediate feedback, emergency medicine is a great specialty to be in clinically because you're confronted with a wide range of medical problems. You have to make the right decision. You have to treat the person effectively. And well, I've been in space, and I'll tell you, being in space was the most amazing thing I've ever done in my life. Maybe what can top that? The most meaningful thing I've ever done in my life is work in healthcare. And, you know, I never saved lives in space. I've saved lives on the ground. And that's something that, for me, my goal in life was to do something meaningful. And that source of meaning changed over time. I started off finding meaning from doing research in neuroscience. And then I found meaning as a clinician. Then I found meaning in exploring space and understanding the world in which we live. And I shifted that to then running a hospital and helping the team members there take care of people in their times of need. So I think it's a really interesting opportunity. And while you guys were thinking of questions, one of the things that I just wanted to share with you is it's tough in academics, right? And Andy, you can weigh in on this one, but you know, you have to learn how to take rejection well, because I don't know about you guys, but not every paper that I've ever submitted got accepted first time round. You know, usually you get kind of comments back from the editors. Sometimes they just sort of go thumbs down, find another journal, but there's a lot of editing that has to go on. I've applied for grants and never received the funding, et cetera. So being resilient and understanding that rejection is something that happens to all of us and not to take it personally is really, really important. If I let other people define my dreams, I never would have achieved the things that I've done in my life. And I think one of the things that I learned is it's what you do when you don't succeed that determines whether you will succeed.
Excellent points. Do we have, oh, Mickey?
Hi, thank you so much for the amazing talk. So I was like, this is again like a personal question, but I've always been interested in medicine, and participating in Brain Bee has really developed my interest in neuroscience as well. So like right now, I really want to pursue both medicine and research, and I believe a lot of people here also are interested in both medicine and research as well. But like, how do you? I think that like so far, like having talked to a few people, a few like both like physician scientists, they always say that like they're always focusing on one thing over another at the point in their lives, and like they're not doing like I'm not sure, but like how do you balance being a physician and a researcher? Like, do you always have to focus, like put more effort into one thing over another, or can you be working on the two at the same time, like equally? And does that like lower the quality of your work? And yeah.
Yeah, let me start by saying it doesn't lower the quality of your work, but there's different perspectives on this. And I'll start by talking about this from an astronaut standpoint. When you're an astronaut, one of the most intimidating things is you have to learn all about the systems of the spacecraft you're on. You have to learn all about the systems of the space station you're going to. You have to learn all about the research you're going to be doing. You have to learn how to do spacewalks, drive a robotic arm, et cetera. It's really intimidating. Until you realize that you don't have to be an expert at everything, you have to be an expert at what you're doing. So if I'm a spacewalker, I need to be an expert spacewalker, and I don't have to worry about the other stuff because that's what I'm there to do. So focus is something that's really critical for us to be able to succeed. Now, some people talk about multitasking. You can read the literature on multitasking. Humans in general are not the world's best at multitasking. They're really good at focusing on a particular issue. So if you want to do an MD, PhD, which I would encourage all of you to be able to do, it's like the best of both worlds, right? okay? You've got a research background, you've got a clinical background, but you'll find some people who have MDs and PhDs who focus clinically, and they're doing clinical research, which is tied to the clinical activities that they're doing. Many people in neuroscience would be neurologists, neurosurgeons, where they have a strong research portfolio tied to the work that they're actually doing clinically, and they're able to do both. If you're a fundamental bench scientist or you're doing preclinical research, and often in those situations, you'll find individuals will not do a lot of clinical work. They're going to slide over into more of a laboratory-focused research paradigm, and then you can always shift back into full-time clinical work or part-time clinical work, depending upon what you're doing. And, you know, it's really interesting. David Hubel won the Nobel Prize for understanding visual processing in the cat cortex. David's an MD. He's not a PhD, and yet he won the Nobel Prize in neurophysiology. So there's multiple different ways of doing it. And what I would suggest is that it's whatever works for you. But it is possible to do both, and to do both really well, and have a very vibrant publication. If you were to look at me on Google Scholar, it's really weird because, first of all, Williams is a common name, but I've got publications in neuroscience, I've got publications in trauma and resuscitation, and I've got publications in space medicine. So there's all these different disciplines where you're able to contribute to the literature. And remember that our careers are long, so you may start out focusing on one particular area, and one of the joys of having an MD PhD is you can then transition into a different area pretty seamlessly and then be able to do different type of research.
Thank you so much.
I think
You're
Andy
welcome.
has to add something there.
Yeah, I want to second Dave's point on that, right? I mean, I don't think it's necessarily a binary choice, right? And sometimes you can try to do both at the same time, depends on what your goals are. And oftentimes I think that some of the more interesting opportunity emerge from that tension. I'll give you a specific example I think Astra's familiar with. I've been talking to her about this for the past several months. So, you know, I work in autism, and as you know, historically, that is very different than, let's say, people that worked on Alzheimer or dementia. But as some of you may know, there was a paper that came out earlier this year where a researcher analyzed large insurance data sets in the US, tens of millions of people, right? 20, 30 million people together, and see whether or not autistic adults have higher risk for dementia. It turns out that autistic adults do, at about 3 to 4-fold the risk of neurotypical people. And that might seem surprising until you start thinking about, you know, how we define neurodevelopmental disability and neurodegenerative diseases, right? We put those labels on those things. A gene, you know, there's no autism gene, there's no Alzheimer gene, there's no dementia gene. They're brain development and maintenance genes. So if you have a variant early in life that could lead to, let's say, increased risk for autism, what is that variant doing later in life, right? When you're further developed. So I think thinking about that intersection, right, between the basic and the clinical is where probably some of the more exciting opportunity are going to be in the coming decades.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Lena, you have another question.
It's, I was wondering what would happen if there was a medical emergency in space. So are there any protocols or like first aid kits on board of the ISS? So, and how advanced would these first aid kits be?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes. And I'll preface my answer by saying this is the millennia in which humans will become a spacefaring species. So just pause and think about that for a sec. We would consider this science fiction, But over the next 100, 200 years, maybe a little bit longer, we're going to see humans living on the moon. We will see humans living on Mars. We've had humans permanently on the International Space Station since the year 2000. So it's been 25 years we've had a continuous human presence in space. So to enable all that to happen, we have a whole field of medicine called space medicine. And space medicine deals with the prevention of on-orbit medical issues by selection. And we used to have, a very rigorous selection process for astronauts. We make sure they don't have any medical problems, et cetera. You have to be fit to fly in space. And now we realize that we're broadening the access to space to non-government astronauts. We have private astronauts, we have space tourists, a whole bunch of people are going to space. So medical events are going to take place in space. Both times I was in space, I ended up treating some of my crewmates. They were all relatively minor issues that you might see in a primary care clinic, nothing really big. But we do have a fairly reasonable medical capability on board the International Space Station. And there we practice what might be known as microgravity medicine. So there's a very small group of people in the world that have done surgery in space, not human surgery, animal surgery. I'm one of them. And we did that on my first spaceflight NeuroLab, where we had these rats in space. We performed a surgical procedure on them, and then they survived the procedure, came back to Earth, et cetera. But more importantly, we learned actually how to do surgery in microgravity, where it's important to restrain your patient, be able to restrain all the sterile instruments you're working with. You cannot hang an IV solution because there's no gravity. So you have to use a constant infusion pump to give fluids to individuals. And I think one of the things that for me as a clinician was really interesting is developing all these procedures that we're ultimately going to use in space on Earth, doing what's known as parabolic flight. And right now, the European Space Agency, to the best of my knowledge, is the only space agency around that still does this. NASA, we used to have an airplane that did parabolic flight where you're flying along straight and level, you climb up to about 30,000 feet like that, and the nose goes forward and you fall out of the sky. And inside the airplane, you're floating around for about 20 seconds. That 20-second period, we could develop all these procedures. So I have a lot of experience doing that. But right now at NASA, we're not doing that anymore. So the European Space Agency, lots of great opportunities. And by the way, for those of you who are in Europe, you might want to think about, summer studentships with ESA or the International Space University. There's all sorts of really exciting opportunities that are available.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Of course. I mean, that's why we're here, right? I mean, for those of you who haven't asked any questions, feel free to ask anything. I mean, this is your time, and there's nothing worse than being in a meeting and then you hang up and you go, I really wish I'd asked that question. So ask your questions. Yeah, go ahead.
Is there a special procedure for a CPR? Because you always get told don't start CPR on like a bed, you need a hard surface for that and so on. So how do you do that in space if the body for one hand would be just flying around through the whole spaceship? How do you do that?
Yes, well, you put the person on a surface. So we have what's known as the CMRS, the Crew Medical Restraint System. It's sort of like a hard stretcher. And you would take the person, put it on there, strap them down, and then they're now on a firm surface. The question is, what do you do? So one solution is you put your feet on the ceiling and you stay straight, and you put your hands above the head and you're pushing like that with your feet on the ceiling. Another solution is to use a restraint around your waist to hold you right beside the CMRS who are able to do CPR. But to your point, all of these procedures are not only going to be harder and more challenging in space, but the question is, physiologically, will they work the same way that they do on Earth? Because the whole body changes when you go to space. In every organ system, whether it's the central nervous system, the respiratory or cardiovascular system, there are changes that take place. And that's one of the things we've been studying on the Mir space station with the Russian space program and on the International Space Station with the international partners.
Thank you.
Nikki.
Oh, you're welcome.
This question is directed mainly towards Andy, but so like I know right now in the US, like the government has been saying that like Benadryl causes autism and things like that. But Do you have any like opinions about that? And how do we like interpret the research that's ongoing currently?
Yeah, great question. So I've been in the community now for 2 decades, right? Over 2 decades now. And I can tell you that the questions that are being asked about causes of autism and so on, and the hypothesis or theory that have been floating around in the community in social media or just traditional media in general is actually the same question that were circulating 20 years ago, right? So sometimes it makes you wonder, what have you really accomplished in 20 years? Um, but I think that, I mean, it's a complicated question. I think that, it depends on the perspective you take. If you want to take it from a kind of anti-science, misinformation, anti-vax perspective, anti-vaccine has been around since as long as vaccine has been around, right? Because really the only intervention medicine that is given before there's a disease, right? There's an illness. So, and because of that, it's obviously misunderstood, is misconstrued, is misinformed, and all this other stuff. But I think if you look at from a more narrow perspective, you know, you do recognize the need to continue to reassure, to share information about autism, with every new generation, right? Because you can't assume, I think this is a lesson for me, that you can't assume that, what you you believe the community has really arrived at after decades of conversations and research is a shared understanding, with this community, but also especially with the next generation community. I mean, what you know now is that, if you just take a look at social media in general, the opportunity for misinformation is so great, right? If you look at TikTok feed or anything like that, there's 10,000 theories about autism, and there seem to be new ones every day. So what we try to do is really, as an organization, uh, we understand the evidence base in terms of our perspective about risk factor, causation, mechanism, the neuroscience that's involved, and so on and so forth. And so we have basic positions that are based on research accumulated over years, in which we craft our talking points, right? So this way we can, generate talking point, whether you're a board member or a chief science officer or you're a volunteer, you'd be able to speak from the same perspective. So what that means is that not only to really try to reduce the science, try to clarify and reduce the science to the essentials, but also present it in a way that is accessible and, more importantly, shareable, right, by people who see the information. Because if you think about it, oftentimes you will trust, let's say, information, shared by your close friends than, let's say, some random person off the street or even in social media in general. So I think that's really a lot of time we think about that. So I think a good example of this is Tylenol, right? The Tylenol case that has been making the rounds in media. Um, that story has been around for decades. I don't know if you guys know this. It's been ongoing lawsuits on and off for decades now. And but the evidence has always been relatively weak, right? And I think the recent resurgence really because of that meta-analysis co-authored by the dean of Harvard Chan School of Public Health that indicates association. But that's in a perfect example, right, where uh, the inartful use of language, the poor understanding of the public about the difference between causation and association, right, is really exploited, right, to create a storyline that I think confused the public, and engender additional mistrust about science in general. So what we try to do is to point out, not complicated ways, right? JT, do you know that there's another paper, there's another study, actually better controlled, better design, that shows no association at all, right? That shows no connection at all. So that you want to be able to talk in those ways so that's accessible, understandable, and immediately push back against information that is not accurate. So it's a constant dance right now. And especially with this, the current climate, is that, the story evolves, right? What's coming down the pike next, I guarantee you, in the coming month, will be conversation around aluminum. That's coming. And now, if you do a Google search, you'll see there's a rich history about aluminum autism out there already, but you'll see a lot of these talking points resurface in the coming month, I guarantee you. So just really, it's a kind of interesting case study, right? Of communication, misinformation, and how science is being used these days more for politics than anything else. It just, yeah. Anyway, I'm rambling again.
Can I just add a couple of comments, Andy, to what you said, just to underscore what you're talking about? I think everybody online, we might refer to as a science ambassador. And our role, no matter whether you've got a bachelor's, master's, PhD, or whatever, if you're passionate about science, you're passionate in asking that question, why, and understanding the truth, whatever truth may be. And the biggest problem with something like autism or other diseases where people are looking at causality is to confuse something that's very commonly found in society and that has an association with the disease versus a causal mechanism. So you could argue, let's look at heart disease, cardiovascular disease, very common in Western societies. People could make the argument that bathtubs cause cardiac disease. If you ask somebody who's a heart patient, do you have a bathtub at home? They're going to say, of course I have a bathtub at home. But bathtubs don't cause cardiac disease. We understand that scientifically there has to be a mechanism. So that's a bit of a facetious indication of an association. So whether or not it's a bathtub or something like Tylenol, if it's in common use, the probability is there will be an association with disease. That doesn't mean there's a causal mechanism.
Thank you, Dave, for that point. Actually, one of my favorite slides by eminent epidemiologist Eric von Bohm, who actually knows as well, shows a curve of growth of autism around the world with the growth of sales of organic product, right? They parallel almost exactly. So what does that mean? So anyway, Celine?
Hi, first of all, thank you so much for both the lectures, which I found absolutely amazing. And so I had a question to Dr. Williams. So I think that at one point of your life, you've been hired by either the government or an organism that was heavily dependent on the government. And so obviously each government has inevitably some political ideas. And have you ever felt pressure to do research on more one thing than the other, or that you have to drift from what you love to fit to the reality of foundings and being hired?
It's a great question. I've never felt pressure to move away from the research that I do. However, there may be a subliminal pressure in the sense that research funds are limited. So research funds are allocated by research organizations into areas where people feel that there's the most important opportunity for research and new knowledge. So whether that's in understanding the mechanism of a disease or developing a new treatment for a disease, you'll find that over the course of time, the allocation of dollars may go back and forth one way or another. And all that means for me as a researcher is that sometimes grants are hard to get and sometimes they're not hard to get. One of the great opportunities is I used to say as a researcher at NASA, it was phenomenal because you're hired by the space agency to be a researcher. So your funding is secured, and then the topic that you're working on may change over time. So in part, it depends on whether you're working in the private sector or the government or the academic academic sector. But there's no question there is a political element in the allocation of resource dollars. I just wish there were more dollars for research available. You know, it's we think about younger people. One of the things I do a lot is speak to individuals like yourselves and talk about the importance of doing research and the great career opportunities. And yet, when you look at it, those career opportunities are tied to funding, which varies over time. But I think the most important aspect is believe in what you're doing. And sometimes it may not be easy, but the path is always there. And, you know, certainly where I'm at in my career, I'm very lucky to say I think I've been involved in doing some amazing things that have made a difference for people on Earth.
Thank you.
I really want to underscore that point that they've made about the government doesn't need to be explicit about what they support, don't support, right? They just say we have funding opportunity for this line of research right now and not others. So I think this is really evident in autism research, especially since the beginning of this year. You know, previously there's these open calls. Anyone can submit a proposal anytime about anything related to autism to NIH and expect they get a fair review. But right now, what is being prioritized at NIH are research related to causation. So if you're doing a public health research project, do a clinical research project, it's much more difficult to get funded, and you know that because the competitive landscape and what they will have money for has shifted without ever telling you, explicitly that's what's happening.
Thank you.
And that's why funding organizations like your Autism Speaks are really important as well, contributor. Yeah.
The other opportunity for all of you to think about is developing a breadth of skills. Be able to pivot. And, if you're a researcher, you need to be able to write really, really well. That's transferable no matter what you do. And it's also helpful if you're really good at public speaking. That's transferable no matter what you do. And then do a little inventory of what are the skills that I have right now? And what are the skills that I want to be able to acquire over the next 5 years of my career? Because those skills are also transferable and help you whether you're working in a pharmaceutical company, or if you're working in a hospital doing research, or if you're working in an academic environment.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Do we have
Great
any more
question.
questions? Anybody else? This is your chance. Oh, we got one more. Luca.
Hello, thank you to both of you for telling us your stories and your advice. I'm just wondering, Dr. Williams, when you switched from neurobiological research into healthcare, especially emergency, which are quite opposites, that drastic change, was it overwhelming, especially by the fast reactions you need to have in emergency? And were there things that you feel without them you might have been overwhelmed by that change?
I didn't find it overwhelming. It was certainly a lot of work. And I think one of the things that's really interesting, when you do an undergraduate degree, you're learning a lot about a lot of different things. And then as you go to graduate school, do a master's or a PhD, or if you go to medical school, you're beginning to focus your knowledge base. So I was able to transfer all of my knowledge of general physiology into my medical training, and that helped me significantly in critical care and resuscitation, where our ability to succeed in resuscitating individuals is really tied to our understanding of pathophysiology and normal physiology and pharmacology and being able to intervene effectively. But I think the common factor in all of this is a word that might resonate with you guys. It's resilience. I just never wanted to give up in my dreams. And no matter how hard it was, I figured out a way to make it happen. Wasn't always easy. Certainly working as an emergency physician where you're working 24 hours a day and you're seeing trauma patients at 3 a.m, it can be stressful. But I really enjoyed the challenge of being able to deal with different unknown circumstances, and whatever came through the door, we would have to be able to respond to. One of the reasons why I love being an astronaut is because your peers, the other astronauts, we're pretty well all the same in the sense that we love learning. And most astronauts I know have a lifetime love of reading, and they'll go off and they'll do a university degree just for the heck of doing a university degree in that area because they're really passionate about learning and things. So don't forget that that's the opportunity that we all have. We can control our own destiny and our commitment to developing ourselves. Yeah, it can be hard sometimes, if you've got an evening off, instead of going out with your friends to go to the lab or go read a book or do something like that. But there are times in our lives when it's worthwhile focusing on building your knowledge and building your skill set. And I would say that one of the things we focus on as astronauts are 3 words: judgment, skills, and knowledge. And right now, as undergraduates, you're building your knowledge. As graduate students and researchers, you're focusing that knowledge. But over time, you're also building your skills. And as researchers, having a breadth of skills. So I've done EEG recordings, I've done intracellular recordings, I've done extracellular recordings. I've done a breadth of things in everything from mollusks through to rats and cats and humans. So that breadth of skill set makes you transferable in whatever jobs you're going to be able to do. So focusing on building your knowledge, building the skills that you have, and then over time, building your judgment. And the judgment with research can be, what's an interesting research project? What's something that's doable? And I'll go back to the comment about impossible. When I was doing molecular biology in the 1970s as an undergraduate at McGill University, we were taught that it was impossible to map the human genome. Been there, done that. We do it in space now. And why were we taught that? Because it seemed impossible at the time. But things change over time. So rather than use the word impossible, ask the question, under what circumstances might it be possible to do whatever it is you're trying to do? But my recommendation to all of you is figure out what your dreams are and just go for it. Be passionate about it. When it gets hard, keep going. Figure out a way to move forward and talk to your friends, network, and be able to make sure you've got a support system to help you when you get to those tough moments. But is it worth it? Unquestionably, yes. It's an amazing experience working in academia and research.
Thank you very much for your answer.
Okay.
Andy, any final words of wisdom?
No, nothing more wise than Dave.
So one more call. Any more questions? Last chance. Nope. Well then,
should we
Dave,
talk about should we talk about the posters?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
So I think I sent a package to Astrid last week and she's received it. So there are posters from the STS-90 mission. That slide I had with the Cahal poster? We have copies of those, and I think you're all going to get a copy. I hope, fingers crossed. And we also have a Neurolab textbook that's signed. And we were thinking that if you might send us a little paragraph, send it to Astrid and she'll forward it on, and maybe Andy and I can look at it, but send us a paragraph on what your career aspirations are as a scientist, or doesn't necessarily even need to be a scientist. If you want to be policy, if you want to be a clinician, whatever your career aspirations are, we'll look at those ones, and whoever we think is best, you're going to get a copy of the Neurolab book signed by me. Is that a good idea, Astrid?
And that's a great idea. Thank you very much. Everybody.
And Andy, you're okay with this? Is why I've just signed us up to look at a few emails.
Oh, good.
And maybe Autism Speaks can throw in something as well.
Of course.
Wait, who do we have to send it to again?
You can send it to Matthias. We'll follow up on that. This has just come up. We just discussed this morning because of the generous contribution that Dave sent to me, and I just received this week. We just talked about this idea earlier, but I think one of you should get the book. But we want to make you work for it a little bit. So, but you will all get a poster if you're interested in it. Yeah, and we'll talk about it with Matthias. We'll follow up with you after the World Championship on that. So with that, let me thank you all for being here. Let me thank our speakers. Wonderful talks. Thank you very much. And thank you for sharing your wisdom. I want to thank Eleanor Thompson again. It's really, really sorry that she wasn't able to join us. Before I go on, does Lena have another question?
Yes, I do. I wanted to ask if there is a deadline for the mail to Matthias.
Oh, no, we'll come up with a reasonable timeline for that. There's no urgency for that. We're going to be busy with other follow-up anyhow, so we'll organize a timeline. We'll let you know. But yeah, you'll have some time to put something together. Absolutely. Andy, great seeing you again. Thank you very much. Dave, wonderful seeing you again as well. Thank you very much.
you.
Thank you all for being here. Some of you will go on to the life-changing session tomorrow. Congratulations and good luck. But again, all of you are already winners, and well done being here. Thank you for joining, despite it being in the middle of the night or very early in the morning for some of you. What do you have next? Matthias, next is, and we can say goodbye to our